She was supposed to be just family, just the girl my father married into our home, but the way she looked at me that night changed everything. I told myself it was wrong, that these feelings were dangerous, but the more I tried to bury them, the stronger they grew. She was my secret, my temptation, my comfort in a world that never understood me. I never thought one mistake, one stolen moment, could turn into the kind of love that kept me awake all night. And once it started, there was no going back. I still remember the night she moved into our house. It was supposed to be simple, a new family forming after my father remarried, two lives blending into one home. She came with her quiet smile, her suitcase that looked too small for all the stories she carried, and a presence that filled every corner of the room. At first, I tried to treat her like a sister, reminding myself of the titles and roles that society expected us to play. But from the very beginning, there was something about her eyes, how they lingered a little too long on mine, how they seemed to notice when I was lost in thought, how they followed me even when she pretended not to look. It made me uneasy and curious at the same time. Nights in that house always felt louder than the days. The silence carried every sound, every whisper of movement down the hallway, and every breath behind closed doors. I would lie awake sometimes, restless, wondering why her laugh at dinner still echoed in my mind hours later. I could hear her footsteps from the other side of the wall, and it was as if my body had learned to wait for them, listening without meaning to, craving that proof of her presence. I told myself it was harmless, that I was only noticing because everything was new. But the truth was, I was drawn to her in ways I didn't understand yet, ways I didn't want to admit. She was gentle in her own strange way. She would brush past me in the kitchen, her hand grazing mine like it was an accident, but her eyes would say otherwise. She'd borrow my sweater and pretend she forgot to give it back, only to wear it around the house as if it belonged to her now. She had this way of making me feel seen, even when I wanted to hide, like she could read every thought I tried to lock away. It was terrifying, the way she seemed to break through the walls I had built, but it was also intoxicating. I remember one evening when we sat in the living room after everyone else had gone to bed. The TV played some movie neither of us was watching, the glow flickering across her face. She was sitting so close, our knees almost touching, and I could feel the warmth of her body radiating against mine. My heart raced in my chest, louder than the dialogue on the screen, louder than the ticking clock on the wall. I told myself to move, to put distance between us, but I couldn't. It felt like gravity itself was holding me there, binding me to her. She looked at me then, not just glanced, but really looked, like she was searching for something in my eyes. For a moment, the world disappeared, the movie, the house, even the rules that said she was my stepsister. It was just her and me, locked in a silence so heavy it was hard to breathe. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in my throat. She smiled, that soft smile that always carried a hint of mischief, and leaned just a little closer. Not enough to cross a line, but enough to make my body burn with questions I couldn't ask out loud. That night, when I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost of her closeness, hearing the echo of her laughter, and replaying the way her eyes had searched mine. I knew then that I was standing at the edge of something dangerous, something that could ruin everything if it was ever spoken aloud. But I also knew I couldn't walk away from it. I didn't want to. It was the kind of feeling that grows quietly, wrapping itself around your heart until you realize it's too late to cut it free. I tried to convince myself it was just admiration, that I was simply adjusting to her being part of my world. But deep down, I knew better. I knew there was a storm waiting between us, a storm I both feared and longed for. And as much as I tried to push it away, the truth was already written in the way my body reacted to her presence, in the way my heart betrayed me every time she was near. That first night, when everything was still new, was the night I understood that my life was no longer mine alone. Something had shifted, quietly but permanently, and I could never go back to the way things were before she came into my world. The days that followed felt heavier, like every moment between us carried an invisible weight that only the two of us could feel. We never spoke of that night in the living room, but it stayed alive in the way our eyes caught each other's across the table, in the pauses that stretched too long when our hands brushed, and in the silence that spoke louder than any words. It was almost cruel, the way ordinary life kept moving around us while I carried the secret storm inside me. My father would laugh at dinner, her mother would talk about work, and I would sit there pretending to be normal, all while my heart was racing because she was sitting just inches away. She had a way of testing me, and I don't think it was unintentional. She would lean too close when showing me something on her phone, her hair brushing my shoulder, or she would whisper a comment in my ear when no one else could hear, her breath soft against my skin. It made my whole body tense, but not with fear, with a kind of hunger I couldn't admit. I started to wonder if she felt it too, if she was carrying the same restless fire that kept me awake at night. One evening, we were in the kitchen after everyone had gone upstairs. She was standing at the counter, reaching for a glass, and I walked in without thinking. The air shifted immediately. It always did when it was just the two of us, like the house itself held its breath. She turned to me with that half-smile, her eyes glinting in the dim light, and asked if I couldn't sleep either. I shook my head, trying to play it casual, but my voice betrayed me when I asked her the same. She laughed softly and said she just needed water, but there was something in her tone that felt like more than that. I stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching her pour the water, the sound of it echoing louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. She handed me the glass without asking, her fingers brushing mine, and the touch lingered longer than it should have. My chest tightened, and I looked away, but I knew she noticed. She always noticed. She leaned against the counter, sipping her own water, and we talked in whispers as if someone might hear us, even though the house was silent. She asked me about my day, but her eyes never left my face, studying me like I was some puzzle she wanted to solve. The longer we stood there, the more the air grew charged, and I could feel the question hanging between us, what are we doing? Yet neither of us had the courage to ask it. That night, I couldn't pretend anymore. When I went back to my room, I pressed my face into the pillow, trying to calm my racing heart, but all I could think about was the way her eyes lingered on me, the way her touch felt like more than an accident. I knew then that this wasn't just curiosity. It wasn't something I could dismiss as a passing thought. It was deeper, stronger, something that scared me because of how much I wanted it. And the worst part was knowing that she felt it too. It was in her gaze, in her silence, in the way she drew closer instead of pulling away. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also undeniable. Every day after that seemed to blur into one long moment, one continuous thread of longing and fear and quiet excitement. I carried her in my thoughts wherever I went, replaying every word she spoke, every look she gave me, every laugh that seemed meant only for me. And each time I told myself to stop, to draw the line, I found myself sinking deeper instead. She had become the secret rhythm of my life, the unspoken truth I lived with every second, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came undone. It was a rainy evening when everything between us grew heavier than I thought I could carry. The storm outside rattled against the windows, the kind of weather that made the house feel smaller, like the walls were closing in. I was curled up on the couch with a book, trying to distract myself, but my mind wasn't on the pages. It was on her, always on her. She walked in wearing one of my old hoodies, her hair damp from the shower, the scent of her shampoo trailing in the air as she sat down beside me. The couch dipped slightly, pulling me closer to her without choice, and I felt my pulse quicken just from the nearness. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned back, tucking her legs under her, and glanced at me with that quiet smirk that always made me uneasy. I tried to focus on my book, though the words blurred in front of me, meaningless when she was sitting so close. After a long silence, she asked me why I was always so guarded around her. Her voice was soft, almost teasing, but her eyes were serious. I froze, my throat tightening, and I laughed it off, saying I wasn't guarded, just tired. She didn't believe me, I could see it. She tilted her head and told me I didn't need to hide with her, that she saw me more clearly than I thought. Those words sank deep, too deep, because she wasn't wrong. She always managed to peel back the layers I kept from everyone else, and it terrified me how much I wanted her to. The rain outside grew heavier, drowning the house in its rhythm, and in that moment, it felt like the whole world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us in our own fragile bubble. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, her fingers lingering against my skin. My breath caught, my body trembling from the simple touch, and I could feel the walls inside me cracking. I wanted to push her hand away, to remind both of us of the line we weren't supposed to cross, but instead, I leaned into her touch, my body betraying the words I couldn't speak. Her eyes softened, and for the first time I saw something raw in them, something unguarded. She whispered that she thought about me more than she should, that sometimes she wondered if I felt it too. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt, because hearing her say the very thing I'd been battling inside myself made it all too real. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous, but I didn't look away. My book slipped from my hands, forgotten, and I let myself drown in the weight of her gaze. She leaned a little closer, not enough to erase the space completely, but enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath mixing with mine. Every nerve in my body screamed with anticipation, with fear, with longing, and I knew I was standing on the edge of a choice I couldn't undo. The storm outside roared, the thunder shaking the walls, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside me. My heart was a drum, my thoughts a blur, and still I couldn't move away. She didn't kiss me that night, though part of me wished she had. Instead, she pulled back at the last moment, giving me a small smile as if she understood how close we were to breaking something we couldn't fix. She stood, stretching as if nothing had happened, and told me not to stay up too late before walking away, leaving me on the couch with my whole body trembling and my mind spinning. That night, lying in bed, I realized I was past the point of pretending. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't one-sided. She felt it, too. It lived in her words, in her eyes, in the touches that lingered too long. And even if we kept dancing around it, even if we kept pretending it was nothing, I knew the truth. We were already caught in it, bound together by something neither of us could undo, and sooner or later, one of us would stop holding back. The tension between us became something I could no longer escape. Every day felt like a silent test of how long we could keep pretending nothing was happening, how long we could act like the air wasn't charged every time we walked into the same room. She made it impossible to ignore. Little things, subtle but deliberate, kept pulling me deeper into the web we were spinning around ourselves. She would sit too close at dinner, her knee brushing against mine under the table without apology, or she would borrow my things and wear them like a second skin, as though she wanted me to see pieces of myself draped over her body. I tried to tell myself that it was just teasing, just her playful nature, but deep down I knew better. There was intention in every smile, every glance, every lingering touch. One afternoon, it was just the two of us again. The house was quiet, our parents gone for the day, and for once there was no noise to distract me, no excuse to hide. I was in my room, headphones in, pretending to be lost in music when she walked in without knocking. She always did that, like boundaries didn't exist with her, like the rules didn't apply. She sat on the edge of my bed, pulling the headphones from my ears, and asked what I was listening to. I told her, but I wasn't sure she even cared. She was looking at me, really looking, her eyes scanning my face as if she could see the words I wasn't saying. Then she lay back on the bed, her arm brushing against mine as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I froze, every muscle tight, because the simple contact sent a wave of heat through me I couldn't control. She closed her eyes for a moment, sighing softly, and whispered that she liked being around me because I made her feel safe. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Safe. It wasn't the kind of safe people usually meant. It was loaded, heavy with meaning, like she was telling me more than she should. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the question died on my lips, replaced by silence and a heart that beat far too fast. Lying there beside her, our arms touching, our breaths falling into rhythm, I realized how dangerous it had become. We weren't just sisters by circumstance anymore. We weren't just two girls forced to share a home. There was something growing between us, something that neither of us dared to name, but it was there, undeniable. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger it grew. She turned her head then, her face just inches from mine, and whispered that sometimes she wished things were different. My chest tightened, and I asked what she meant, though I already knew. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, her eyes searching, waiting, almost daring me to acknowledge the truth. The silence between us stretched until I thought I might break. And then she smiled, a small, almost sad smile, and said maybe I already understood. She left soon after, leaving me on the bed with my thoughts tearing me apart. I pressed my hand against the spot where her arm had rested, feeling the ghost of her warmth, and I knew with painful certainty that we had crossed into a place we couldn't come back from. Nothing had been said outright, but everything had been spoken in that silence, in her words, in her touch. That night I couldn't close my eyes without seeing her face, without replaying the way her voice had cracked when she said she wished things were different. And deep down, I couldn't stop wondering if maybe she wasn't just wishing. Maybe she was waiting. The days after that moment in my room were unbearable in their quiet intensity. Every word between us felt layered, every glance stretched too long, every touch disguised as accidental but heavy with meaning. It was as if we were walking along the edge of a cliff, pretending not to see the drop even though the ground beneath us trembled. I tried to stay busy, burying myself in schoolwork and chores, but nothing could dull the way she lingered in my thoughts. Her presence had become like a shadow, always there even when she wasn't in the room. One evening, I found her sitting outside on the back porch, the cool air curling around her like a blanket. She was staring at the sky, lost in thought, and I hesitated before joining her. The boards creaked under my weight, and she turned, her face lit by the faint glow of the porch light. She smiled softly, patting the space beside her, and I sat down, folding my arms around my knees. For a while we said nothing. The silence was comfortable and terrifying at the same time. Then she asked me if I ever felt like I was living two lives, the one people saw and the one that never left your chest. I froze at her words because it was like she had pulled the thoughts directly from my own mind. I told her yes, quietly, almost ashamed, and she nodded as if she had been waiting for that answer. She whispered that she felt the same, that sometimes she wondered what it would be like if she didn't have to hide who she was or what she wanted. My heart hammered as her words hung in the air between us. She wasn't just speaking about life in general. She was speaking about us. I could feel it. I wanted to ask her outright, to drag the truth from her lips, but my courage failed me. Instead, I admitted that I thought about things I shouldn't, that sometimes it scared me how much. She turned to me then, her expression soft but burning with unspoken emotions. She reached out and touched my hand, her fingers wrapping around mine, and the world seemed to stop. The night noises faded, the chill of the air vanished, and all that existed was her warmth seeping into me. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. It was the first time we had crossed the line so clearly, without excuses or distractions, and it shook me to my core. Her thumb brushed against my skin as if to reassure me, and she whispered that I didn't have to be afraid. But I was. Afraid of being caught. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of how much I wanted her in that moment. I tried to say something, anything, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I squeezed her hand back, and that small gesture spoke louder than anything else. We sat like that for what felt like forever, our hands intertwined, hearts racing, eyes locked. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't some dramatic confession. But it was real, undeniable, and once it happened, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. When we finally let go, the absence of her touch was almost painful. I went to bed that night feeling like I was carrying a secret so fragile and yet so powerful it could shatter everything around me. But instead of regret, there was a quiet ache, a longing that told me this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of something neither of us had the strength to stop. Should I move straight into chapter 6 and keep the emotional build flowing, or do you want me to pause until you give the signal? After that night on the porch, there was no way to return to the version of us that had existed before. Something had been spoken without words, sealed in the way our hands had clung to each other, and the silence after carried more weight than any confession could. We moved through the days pretending nothing had changed, but beneath the surface everything had. Every glance was heavier, every brush of contact sharper, every moment we were alone felt charged with an electricity that neither of us dared to name out loud. It was as though we were walking through fire together, pretending not to feel the burn while knowing it was consuming us both. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when she came up behind me and placed her hand lightly on the small of my back. It was such a small gesture, one that could have been innocent, but the way her hand lingered there, her fingers curling slightly as if she wanted to hold me in place, made me shiver. I turned, water dripping from my hands, and met her gaze. She didn't look away this time. There was no pretense, no mask. Her eyes burned into mine, full of questions and hunger and fear all at once. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, the silence thickened, and the world shrank to just her touch against my back and the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. She leaned a little closer, her breath brushing my cheek, and for a moment I thought she would finally erase the space between us. But then she pulled away suddenly, as if she had caught herself at the edge of something she wasn't ready to fall into. She laughed nervously, muttered something about helping with the dishes, and grabbed a towel to dry. I stood there trembling, my chest tight, trying to steady my breathing while my mind spun in circles. That night, unable to sleep, I lay in bed replaying every detail, the way her hand had rested on me, the heat in her eyes, the way she had almost let go of her restraint. I wanted it so badly, and that terrified me. The next evening, it happened again, though differently. We were in my room, music playing softly from my phone, and she sat on the floor beside me, leaning back against the bed. We talked about nothing, school, friends, the kind of meaningless chatter that fills silence. But underneath, something was happening. The way she kept glancing at me, the way her smile lingered too long, the way her body seemed drawn to mine, it was impossible to ignore. At one point, she reached up and tugged playfully at my sleeve, pulling me down beside her. I laughed, but the laughter died the moment our faces were close, too close. Her hand was still gripping my sleeve, and her eyes were locked on mine, steady and unflinching. The air grew heavy, and in that moment I realized we were standing at the very edge of the line we had been circling for weeks. My heart raced, my throat tight, and still I didn't move. Neither did she. The music kept playing in the background, but it might as well have been silence. She finally let go of my sleeve, but instead of pulling away, her hand brushed against mine on the floor, fingers hovering, then slowly intertwining with mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. My body lit up at the contact, every nerve awake, and I held onto her hand as if letting go would break me. We sat like that, our fingers tangled, our breaths uneven, caught in a moment that felt endless. Nothing was said, but everything was understood. We were no longer pretending. We couldn't. And even though fear pulsed at the edges of my thoughts, fear of discovery, fear of what this meant, the longing was stronger. It was undeniable. That night, when she finally left my room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my hand still tingling from her touch. I knew we were too far gone to turn back now. Whatever this was, it had already claimed us, and there was no undoing it. The days turned into a blur of hidden glances and silent touches that carried more meaning than any words could. I found myself living in two worlds, the one our family saw, where we were just stepsisters sharing the same roof, and the one that belonged only to us, a world built from stolen moments and quiet secrets. It was exhausting to keep up the mask, but at the same time, it was addictive. Every time her hand brushed mine, every time her eyes lingered on me across the dinner table, it felt like we were writing a story no one else could ever read. And yet, underneath all of it, there was the constant fear of what would happen if anyone found out. One night, it all came to a breaking point. We were in her room, the door shut though it never usually was, and the dim lamplight cast soft shadows against the walls. She was lying on her bed, scrolling through her phone, while I sat on the floor pretending to read. But the truth was, I couldn't focus on a single word. My attention kept drifting to her, the way she shifted lazily, the way her hair fell across her face, the sound of her quiet breathing. It was unbearable. I wanted to be closer, needed to be closer. Then, as if she could read my mind, she set her phone aside and told me to come up beside her. Her voice was casual, but there was an edge beneath it that made my heart race. I hesitated, but she patted the space next to her, and I obeyed, climbing onto the bed and lying down with a gap between us that suddenly felt too wide. She rolled onto her side, facing me, her hand propped under her cheek. She studied me in silence, and I felt exposed, like she could see every thought I was trying to bury. Finally, she whispered that she couldn't keep pretending anymore. My breath caught. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I asked what she meant, even though I already knew. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and touched my face, her fingers tracing along my jaw with a gentleness that sent shivers through me. She said she thought about me all the time, that she couldn't stop, no matter how hard she tried. My eyes burned with tears I didn't even know were coming, because hearing her admit what I had been too afraid to say out loud broke something inside me. I told her I felt the same, that I had been fighting it, drowning in it, terrified of it, but that I couldn't deny it anymore. The room grew so quiet then, like the whole world was holding its breath. She leaned in, slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted, but I didn't. I couldn't. Our foreheads touched, our breaths mingling, and the closeness made my heart ache. It was the most fragile, most powerful moment of my life. When her lips finally brushed against mine, it was soft, trembling, almost hesitant, but it lit something inside me I had never felt before. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a surrender, a promise. My hand shook as I held on to her, afraid she would slip away, but she pressed closer, deepening the kiss, and I knew we had crossed the line completely. There was no going back. When we pulled apart, both of us breathless, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Everything had already been said in that silence, in that kiss, in the way our hearts beat together like they had been waiting for this moment all along. I lay there with her, the space between us gone, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange kind of peace. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also beautiful. And even though the world outside our door would never understand, in that moment, none of it mattered. The morning after that first kiss was the hardest. The sunlight poured into the house as if nothing had changed, but inside me everything was different. I moved through the motions of breakfast, of small talk with our parents, pretending that I was just myself, but all I could feel was the memory of her lips against mine and the way my heart had raced when our hands tangled in the dark. She sat across the table from me, her hair messy from sleep, her eyes meeting mine just once before darting away. No one else noticed, but I felt it, a current between us that had grown too strong to hide. Every moment felt like a secret we were carrying together, a bond that tied us in silence even as the world spun around us. Later that day, when the house emptied and it was just the two of us again, the silence became unbearable. I found her in the living room, curled up with a blanket, and for a long moment we just stared at each other without speaking. Finally, she whispered that she didn't regret what had happened, but she was scared. Scared of what people would say, scared of the weight it carried, scared of how much she wanted it to happen again. Her honesty made my chest ache, because I felt every word of it too. I sat down beside her, close enough for our shoulders to touch, and told her that I was scared as well, but that pretending it wasn't real hurt more than the fear ever could. Her eyes softened, and she reached for my hand, holding it tightly as though letting go would mean losing everything. That night, when we found ourselves in her room again, we didn't fight it. We didn't circle around it like we had before. We allowed the silence to lead us, our hands exploring the space between us, our bodies learning the language our hearts had been whispering for so long. It was tender and overwhelming all at once, a mixture of laughter and trembling confessions, of lips brushing over skin and breathless gasps of relief. It wasn't about rushing or proving anything. It was about finally allowing ourselves to feel without restraint, without denial, without shame. For the first time, the walls we had built around ourselves collapsed, and in their place was only honesty. Afterwards, as we lay tangled together in the quiet, she whispered that she had never felt this alive, that being with me made the world make sense in a way it never had before. I pressed my forehead against hers and told her I felt the same, that for so long I had been afraid of my own feelings, but now, holding her, I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear of the world was still there, lingering in the shadows, but it no longer outweighed the truth between us. What we had was real. What we had was ours. In the days that followed, we became better at carrying our secret. To everyone else, we were the same as before, but behind closed doors, in stolen moments and quiet touches, we lived in a world that belonged only to us. There was guilt sometimes, and the ever-present worry of what it might mean if we were discovered, but there was also joy, a joy so profound it made the risk worth taking. Loving her taught me courage, it taught me honesty, and it showed me that sometimes the things the world tells you are wrong are the very things that make your heart beat the loudest. And as I lay beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath as she drifted into sleep, I knew I would rather risk everything than spend one day pretending I didn't feel this way. Because this was not a mistake. This was not something to regret. This was love, raw and complicated and unspoken, but love all the same. And no matter what the world might say, I would hold on to it, onto her, with everything I had.